And now I go to share screen. And now I go here and share, and I go up, translation, print slide. So I hope, let's see. It's doing this again, Rudy. I don't know why you're getting the double screen, but is that going to be good enough?
Big enough for me.
Okay. So we talked about the American Civil War last time, and I was talking about Yuval Harari, whose book we read, and he's from Israel, and he seems perplexed. There doesn't seem to be that big a difference between the parties in America as opposed to Israel, where there's big differences. And he just seems it's silly that we would destroy the American Republic over who gets to go into which toilets. And then we talked briefly at the ending that maybe there's a psychological problem. We've really, truly just been wrestling with a very diverse democracy for 57 years. The clock really didn't start till 1965. We ended talking about Freud's concept of the narcissism of small differences, that people just, they get to know each other, familiarity breeds contempt, and then you get into silly little feuds and hypersensitivity to minor differences. This has been noticed in the anthropological setting as well. And it reminded me of this quote. I'll just let you read it. It's just perfect. The politics at university, we've, I think, all known professors and we've heard it, but we also saw it in the movie Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Richard Burton is on the faculty, and Elizabeth Taylor's father's the head of the department, and oh my God, it was vicious. So Harari says the real problem is that you see your political rivals as your enemy, and they're out. You think they're out to destroy you, so you've got to destroy them first. And democracy is simply impossible. And that was the mood we were in last week. I trust we're all in a little bit better mood this week. Because it seems like the people that needed to lose lost, and it seems like they're accepting the results. So Harari's solution, though, is not persuasion, not rational. It's to tell stories. Hello, Jim. Welcome. It's to tell stories. He's been studying Homo sapiens for a very long time, and that was his first big book. So he's a big thinker, and we read as a group his 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. But he thinks humans are wired to tell stories, and that they'll only change if there's a better story. And he says the whole 20th century was really just three stories: liberal capitalism, the West, America, versus communism versus fascism. And we won, but now liberal capitalism is under siege by the autocrats. They don't have a new story. Snyder makes this point over and over again. Putin has no story of the future. His story is of the past. And if these autocrats win, it's just really going to be chaos. It's important to live in some sort of shared reality, but really it's our fictions that motivate us. And it's good storytellers that get power. And, you know, in a way, Trump's a good storyteller. It's a crappy story, and it's looking backwards, just like Putin. I mean, it's also a deluded belief you can go back to the future and the glory of the past. And what it takes, he thinks, for to change people's minds is to give them a better story. And, you know, what would our story be? Well, there seems to be consensus across the board, a belief in freedom, a belief in equality of some kind, at least equality of opportunity. And he has a basic test, 4 simple questions. Do you think people should have the right to choose their own government? Everybody says yes to that, and that gets rid of the old, a former way of responding. That, oh, we've got to have a king who's graced by God. And then, do you think people should have the right to choose their own profession? Sure. In the old days, if your father was a cobbler, you'd be a cobbler. Do you think people should have the right to choose their own spouse? We do. But, you know, it's interesting. In Asia, there are a number of cultures where the parents still pick the bride, and that's the source of a lot of conflict and a lot of sad stories, really. And do you think people should have the right to choose their religion? That's it, you know. And if you answered yes to even 3, you're a liberal. You believe in the liberal democracy. Now, after that, that's the key ideology. After that, you just have to agree on the stories and the fine details. There's an effort to tell American stories. It's called the American Creed. It's a PBS project. This is one of my classmates, David Kennedy, who's the head of the Department of History at Stanford, and Condoleezza Rice, who was a dean. Okay, we got one more coming in here. Hello, Carol, who was a dean of at Stanford, and they got to know each other, and they liked each other. At the beginning of the documentary, Kennedy says, "Look at us, you can tell we're really different," you know. And he's been a progressive as long as I've known him, as opposed to Condoleezza Rice. Also, a main character in this documentary is an American Indian from Oklahoma who's a principal in a school. And she has an interesting story to tell. She's a 5th generation educator, as is Condoleezza Rice, by the way. So their story is, what does it mean to be American? This is what this documentary series is trying to flesh out. Kennedy was the head of part of the idea and presenting it to PBS. What ideals do we share in common? Yeah, we're a fractured nation. And they're trying to find stories that unite us. So they're on the same page with Yuval Harari. The stories that challenge us. And Condoleezza Rice has a lot of interesting stories, even though I don't agree with her politically. She's got interesting stories. Bob Kelso is with us today. He sent me, after our last session, a very interesting article that addressed all the talk of civil war we were hearing before the election on Tuesday. And this was a very interesting essay. Anybody interested? It's written by Carl M. Cannon. And at the end of the article, you could see it centered at Gettysburg, because obviously that's a very important place for our concept of civil war. And this is the executive director of the Gettysburg College, which is right near the Eisenhower Institute. If you go to Gettysburg, you pass right by the Eisenhower Institute. And so, of course, she's leading all kinds of seminars with students coming through. And she ends with this observation on Gen Z. She finds hope in Gen Z, the belief that she's watched them work through differences, and she's moderated debates with the Gen Z. And they interact and rethink their positions. So she's very optimistic. It's always been, we were talking a little bit with Bob earlier, that it's always been kind of hard to keep track of what are the generations and what years. And so I'm just going to take Gen Z and the way that this graphic handles it so well. So you look at when the years that you're born, and that you drop down from the yellow here, and you see that Gen Z goes 1997 to 2012. And then the darker period is the years that you come of age. And then the flat line straight across is when the years that generation will be really influential. And then at the end of that flat line begins the range of dates where that generation will decline in influence. And of course, you all always go back to your own generation and plot that out. But I'm not a baby boomer. I'm the silent generation, along with Iko and Ramsey, maybe a few others of you. And okay, so that's Harari. That's the American Civil War. That's telling stories, interacting with each other. I just want to, as an aside, talk about how prescient Harari was at the beginning of COVID. When everybody was panicking, he said, hey, we have the best information against these pathogens. We have information, scientific analysis. COVID's just relying on blind mutations. And that he predicted the genetics will solve us as they did, and how quickly things moved within a matter of weeks, identifying the COVID genome. And he says the real protection for humanity comes in sharing reliable information, because it was Chinese scientists who ignored their politicians and posted the genome on the web. And global solidarity, if we're going to fight pandemics, is what's necessary. But there were some people that didn't do quite as well. The EU acted swiftly and generously and got aid out to other parts of the world. Whereas the Trump administration kind of cut support for the World Health Organization, and we lost some friends, and we were kind of, as far as the international attack, we were on the sidelines. And he thought the weakest, the Achilles heel for humans is the mistrust. That will be the virus's greatest victory when we squabble. When we squabble, viruses double. That was his thing. I want to move to a different topic. I was wrong last week about something. I was excessively optimistic about democracy in the world based on a Pew statement made in 2009 19 about data that was 2 years old. And they came up with very, very rosy statistics and a rosy couple of maps that showed how much things that had improved since 1977. And so here 40 years later, there was a lot more blue. And so the conclusion was optimistic. I have come on another source of information on evaluating democracies and governance. It's the V-Dem Institute. It's an independent research Swedish institute, and the data that they generate is a part of the World Bank's research, so they're very well funded, and they came up with a different map, which is much less blue and a lot redder. The darker the red, the less democratic. So you can see China is the worst, along with Saudi Arabia and other very dark red. Intensely blue, of course, are the Scandinavian countries. And interestingly enough, Australia is intensely blue. We're not quite as blue, so we're a shade down in their calculations. But what's disturbing is these are countries that have a trend towards autocracy. So we're still a democracy, but over the last 10 years, we have trended in the direction of autocracy. And so has Modi in India, obviously Brazil, Turkey has. And this is just a reminder that we've been living in the age of the strongman. You can't tell that when you're living in an age for 20 years, you don't recognize it. But we've been in the age of the strongman for 20 years, and it's only becoming clear historically in retrospect. This Gabriel Rockman has written a very interesting book, and he's written some articles that we should have seen after the fall of the Soviet Union. We should have been able to predict this age of the strongman. We're in over 20 years now. And he makes the point that fascism has only grown out of failed democracies. That it seems like democracy is the fast track to fascism. And I think Timothy Snyder at Yale would agree with that. So this organization has produced 21 indicators of democracy. And as we go here, there's an abbreviation, CSO. That's really what we've been referring to as NGOs, the civil society organizations. And this is their 21 indicators. And you read through this list, and this is pretty basic stuff. And I'll be glad to send this around for those of you that might not catch it on the video. But 21 things that you look at, you read through them, and you realize, oh, we are trending pink in terms of on the democracy autocracy scale. And so they use this liberal democracy index in a number of sophisticated ways. So this looks really at the last 50 years and looks at the trends. We see that there was a burst of democracy with the fall of communism, just a burst of it. We're up here, the Western democracies in America have always scored well, but you can see we're going down recently. Asia and the Pacific is in particular dropping. Now that they're still fairly high. The solid line is the world average, which captures the tendency to the strong man, the autocrats of the last 20 years. And then you have Eastern Europe and Central Asia. They had a burst, but they're trending down as well. The Middle East has always been down. So they use this index very, very creatively and very sophisticated matter. And they make the point that there are two kinds of autocracies. There's the dictatorship, a closed autocracy. That would be clear and obvious. And there has been an increase of 5 countries that can be placed in that category. And it's grown to 26% of the world population who are living in flat out dictatorships. But there's a more gentle kind of autocracy that still has the format of elections. And this is the bigger group. It's 44%, but you add these two together, you get 70% of the world living in some kind of autocratic system. And this is a graphic of that and how it's changed just in the last 10 years. Up from 49%, a jump of 21% to 70% of the world living in one of the two types of autocracies. And then this breaks it down by region visually, and it's kind of detailed and confusing, but you just squint your eyes, and the bluer the area, the more democracy you have in that area, and the redder the area, or the pinker the area, the more you have of autocracies. You can see Western Europe and America are the bluest, and second bluest, interestingly enough, is Latin America. The Monroe Doctrine has had, I guess, some enduring effect. But Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and this is the Silk Road that we've been studying over the last 9 months. They don't fare so well, and there's been a lot of backpedaling in Asia. The Middle East and sub-Saharan Africa have never been particularly democratic, but it's interesting that sub-Saharan Africa is better than the Middle East and North Africa. And so now they look specifically at some of those indicators, and they contrast the last 10 years. What was happening 10 years ago? How were things trending 10 years ago? And if you're above the diagonal line, that's a positive direction. Your liberal index is high. And so there were more clean elections 10 years ago, and things were getting better in terms of freedom of association and independent election officials. But now you jump to last year, and things are getting worse. They're declining. They're below the diagonal. And in particular, the rule of law has taken a hit. So if you go to V-Dem, you can read through their executive summary, and they have all these statistics. Of the top 20 indicators, which one are suffering the most? And it turns out a repression of civil society organizations. And we read all the time about NGOs being kicked out of countries, censorship of the media. We certainly have seen in our own country respect for counter arguments drop, and so on and so forth. The media bias, we certainly hear a lot about that, and the loss of independent of courts. But here's the big one in our situation. We've had a threat of election management bureaucracy. They should be autonomous, right? And we had with January 6th a direct threat to that. So that's I think of all these indicators, that's the one that we were so worried about a week ago, just a week ago. Fortunately, we seem to have come through. Then they look at individual countries, and there's just a few I want to highlight. Good old South Korea. Of all the Asian countries, they score the highest on the liberal democracy index. Good for them. All these other countries are at least trending in the way of advancing. Unfortunately, there's just a lot more countries that are trending away from liberal democracy. And here's an outlier that we're familiar with: Poland. Ike and I traveled in Poland, and we visited the location of their Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court was being picketed by both sides, and that we know the government has limited the freedom of the courts, and they're being sanctioned now by the EU. The EU is withholding their COVID rescue funds. Hungary probably is a close second in terms of Europe. Brazil, fortunately, we've seen hopefully a reversal of the trajectory of Brazil as Bolsonaro inched them away from liberal democracy. But all these other cases, I won't go through them individually. Obviously, Afghanistan has taken a huge jump backwards. But that a liberal democracy then is clearly on the defensive. We peaked in 2012 with 42, and we've lost 7, down 34, and only 13% of the world population is in a flat out liberal democracy. And that's much different than the statistics I was dealing with from the Pew Trust last week. So mea culpa. And they point out that the decline is especially evident in Asia and the Pacific. So you look at individual indicators, freedom of expression. It was threatened in 5 countries 10 years ago, and now it's threatened in 35 countries. Very sobering. Toxic polarization. We're certainly one of these 34 countries. 10 years ago, only 5 countries were stewing in that. Now they name names. We've already talked about, mentioned most of them. Serbia, we got to throw that in. Serbia is a country that Putin fancies to champion, so you got to keep an eye on Serbia, as we did 100 years ago, leading up to World War I. And Turkey, and I made the point in the previous session, if we had been more lenient and folded them into given them a fast track to the EU, we might be in a much different situation. And then just in the last year, these are the new members, which includes Slovenia, the former First Lady's home country that we toured, 4 years ago, and Tunisia, and that was the spark that lit the Arab Spring. But last year was El Salvador and Mali that disappointed, but this year there's a lot more. And then just frank coups. So 4 coups, and then there's a self coup. The self coup was Tunisia. They came out of the Arab Spring with kind of a democracy, but then when there were protests about COVID, the guy in charge launched a coup against his own government and turned himself into an autocrat. So here's their world ranking. The top 10%, I'll just point out Costa Rica is there. South Korea is there. That's interesting. These are the countries that all have better democracies than we do. We're not on the top 10%. So there you go. We're in the 10 to 20% range. We're 29th in the world in terms of democracy. Canada, I thought, would be higher. They're 24th. Our mother country, United Kingdom, where in our neighborhood, we have a pub and we're all Anglophiles. They're ahead of us at number 19. At least they're better than we are. Then we get to the next tier, and here's Israel, number 41. How often have you heard the defense of Israel as being the only democracy in the Middle East? Well, if you examine that and look at all the 21 indicators, they rank 41st in the world. They're not a stunning example of democracy. And I thought that's interesting because we give a lot of money to Israel. They get the second most absolute amount behind Afghanistan, but Israel's a much smaller country than Afghanistan. And if you look at the per capita aid, it's almost 4 times as much per capita that we give to Israel, a top tier economy, than we give to poor struggling Afghanistan, and we had something to do with their poverty. So a lot of interesting surprises here. Here's the bottom 10%, and we've been talking about the world that China wants. China ain't so good on these objective standards. They're at the bottom. Okay, they're better than Afghanistan and Belarus and Syria, but are they really a model for the world? I don't think so. And so we'll eventually get back to dissecting the world China wants. You can see here they are, the age of the strong man, and she's right there at the top. So I shared this data with Ramsey, just the two of us. He's busy with grandkids today. And his reaction was, hey, we got to learn the new lyrics. Ramsey, what lyrics do we have to learn? We have to learn the lyrics to "The East is Red." This was the Cultural Revolution theme song. So Ramsey had his tongue in his cheek per usual. It was written by a farmer, derived from a folk song, and it was inspired by seeing the rising sun. So there you go. We'll get back to the world China once at some point in time. We'll go through China's grievances, but not yet. We're also going to get back to the history of California. The Miwoks are waiting patiently. But while they're waiting, thanks to Jim Teisel for sending this just hot off the press today. The Miwok Indians are being honored in Sacramento. Sacramento used to be Miwok territory, and we've talked about along with David Klinick, who I think's with us today, about the state park, Grinding Rock State Park, and his efforts to get it named a World Heritage Site. And we might have George Miller on board with that. Jim's working on doing that and bringing that to fruition. But this statue of the Miwok is going to replace who? Junipero Serra. His statue at Sacramento was torn down during the riots. So thanks, Jim, for this up-to-date and reminding us that we're going to be coming back to the Miwoks at some point in time. Kherson, I'll stop for a second and see if anybody wants to comment on the previous topics. Okay, we're eager to get on to Kherson. So this is the map from The Economist. And just to understand the geography, the Black Sea, nice and white here, Odessa, which may have been Putin's previous goal, and so holding the west bank of the Dnieper was going to allow him to pop on over to Odessa certainly quicker. But this blue area of Ukraine troops, after their tremendous success in Kharkiv, have come trickling down here, and they had the Russians backed against the water. And so the Russians said, holy cow, we got to get out of here. And the dotted line is what the Russians had claimed to have annexed. So all this is what they have ambitions to claiming. And that was going to maybe include this whole coastline, which would give them control over exports completely. But they were forced to retreat across to the east bank of the river, leaving the city of Kherson itself. And there is another map from the Institute for the Study of War that just shows this a little bit clearer. Notice that this has a tremendous logistic possibilities with taking the province of Kherson would put Ukraine back into control of water, fresh water coming to Crimea. There's a dam on the Dnieper. So the blue line is the Dnieper River. This is the estuary. So there's a dam here and lakes behind it. And apparently some of that water goes down to Crimea. There was some talk about blowing it up, and the Russians would do that militarily as a strategy, but they'd be shooting themselves in the foot if they ever hope to get a fresh supply of water. And they had claimed this whole area as much for the water as anything else. So we'll see what happens there. I did want to mention the Frankopan appearance. We spent 9 months with his book, and he was on a fabulous podcast panel on Intelligence Squared with Margaret Macmillan and another very knowledgeable guy. And Margaret Macmillan wrote some excellent books. I've read a couple of them. And she's Canadian. She is related to Harold Macmillan distantly. And another podcast that I strongly recommend, and I've mentioned Orlando Figgis before. He's come out with a brand new book, The Story of Russia. But it's as much about the Ukraine as it is about Russia. So the Intelligence Squared podcast, History Extra, a history podcast, a really good podcast. I first tumbled on him on another podcast, the Ukraine Cast, and he gave a very excellent interview. He had just been, he was associated with the memorial organization that shared a Nobel Prize with two other organizations. So I also recommend the Ukraine Cast. And he starts his book with two versions of Vladimir the Great, which tell you a lot. This is Voldemar, as he's known in Ukrainian, the Great. His monument in Kiev, built in 1853, but not to be outdone, Putin put up his own statue of Vladimir, because he's claiming Kiev as a core to modern day Russia. This was put up in 2016, after he had acquired the Crimea and his appetite was whetted. So I do have a story. We're talking about Yuval Harari's stories, and this is an interesting story. But I see we've got 10 minutes left, and I'll take another pause and entertain any comments, questions.
What happened that the Russians just suddenly started withdrawing? I mean, it just happened so quickly. It caught me off surprise.
Yeah, but you could see from that first map that they were surrounded. And all the Ukrainians, the Ukrainians had their land surrounded, almost 95%. And all Ukraine had to do to capture the whole army was to blow up some bridges so that they couldn't escape across the bridges. they were loath to do that because they're
It's their
Ukrainian,
heritage.
the Ukrainian bridges. So you figure what's the value of these bridges versus capturing a whole Russian army. So it was a calculation that they made, and they decided to do an orderly retreat. The problem was their retreat from Kharkiv was disorderly, and they lost a. We saw the photos of all the tanks and stuff that they left behind. They didn't want to go through that again.
So this was an orderly withdrawal?
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, orderly so far.
Which way did they go?
They went east across the river. They still control the state of Kherson. Not
And then they blew up the bridges.
Yeah, they
The-
did. blow up.
The Russians blew up so there are no bridges south
Okay.
of the dam.
Yeah.
Ah,
they
okay.
did do that.
Thanks, Jim. I didn't know that. Okay, if there's no more comments, I'll tell an interesting story here to round out the hour. This guy's a Ukrainian, but his distinction was he was appointed by the Kremlin to be the deputy president of the Kherson military civilian administration in April. Why in the world would a Ukrainian collaborate in such a obvious way? The thing that caught my ear was on the BBC Ukraine cast the day that the Russian withdrawal was announced. He died. He died in a mysterious automobile accident. So let's take a look at that. They don't look like the same automobile accident, so I'm not quite sure, but it doesn't matter. Just doing some legwork on him at Wikipedia. He went to school in the East, in Donetsk, Ukraine, got a degree, started a business, built off that business and got appointed into Department of Fisheries. But at the age of 32 in 2008, he moved to Kherson. That's strange. And he started an NGO there, a propaganda NGO that was pro-Russian. And 2008 was the year that Russia invaded Georgia. So Putin was thinking aggressive stuff then. It'd be another 6 years before he'd take Crimea. The BBC said this guy was kind of goofy. He got accused in social media of child abuse by swinging his baby around his head irresponsibly. So this tips you off that he's maybe not dealing with a full deck. Then mysteriously, he went on a trip to the New World, worked as a handyman in the United States, got a motorcycle, and identified with Che Guevara and became very spiritual. This is all in the Ukraine cast. And I'm going, this is interesting. This is interesting. He came back from America and he conducted seminars in mysticism and a healthy lifestyle, which coincidentally also were Putin themes at about the same time. And even dabbled in some kind of Soviet neo-pagan cult that talked about magical water and internal prophets and conspiracies. But here's the interesting thing. He got into martial arts and judo. And that rang a bell. When we did Putin's biography, we remembered that Putin at the age of 10 discovered the martial arts and was the judo champion in St. Petersburg in 1975. So there's a lot of interesting similarities. Putin thought judo's not just a sport, it's a philosophy. So there's kind of this mystical philosophy stuff going on. This is the guy as a Russian icon. He is talked about the strength of the Russian spirit when he started this NGO in Kherson in 2013. But he's a loose cannon. He's been involved in violent episodes, at least 5. And the last one, he attacked a journalist which made people suspicious that he might be connected to the FSB, because the journalist was investigating his possible links to the FSB. And we can see from his biography, there are a lot of stuff that would make us suspicious that he was connected to the FSB. So he tried to get involved in formal politics unsuccessfully. He joined the Socialist Party, nominated himself, but never got very much in the way of votes. He dabbled in anti-vax and conspiracy theories in the U.S. biolabs in the Ukraine. And then he formally declared in 2021 that he was pro-Russian and he was joining a Russian affiliated party. After the invasion, he started collaborating with this outfit. And by this time, and by March, and remember the invasion just started just a month later after the invasion, the Ukraine government accused him of treason. And then the following month, the Kremlin appointed him deputy president to the governor. He made statements like Russia has Kherson forever. Here he is. He does have a family. And in his job, he switched the currency, advocated switching the currency to the Russian ruble. He said there'd been discrimination against Russian speakers, which is a familiar trope that no longer goes down, because even Russian speakers are horrified at what Putin has done. So Putin has united Ukraine like they've never been united. And he requested Putin make Kherson part of Russia. And he said, you don't even have to do a referendum. Just take my word for it. And he talked about sending Ukraine grain to Russia. This is during occupation. Holy cow. So retribution finally came. He was sanctioned by the EU, and leaflets started appearing around Kherson, offering a reward for his assassination. And so he was a hunted man. And the Ukrainian resistance tweeted, this guy is making up stories of denazification. Nobody's surrendering. The Ukraine forces will still be here to liberate us. So, mister, it's time to pack up and go somewhere in Russia. As Ukraine slowly advanced towards Kherson, he made a video, but investigation found that he was inside Russia when he made the video. He did not make it from Kherson. He said, I was recruiting workers. In September, he made it official. He got a Russian passport. And as the news started closing around Kherson, he blamed incompetent Russian commanders and said they should shoot themselves. And he wasn't the only one. The Chechen warlord who has a lot of Chechen men in Ukraine, go figure, said much the same thing. So he died in a suspicious car crash. I don't know which photo was for real, but it was 130 miles away from Kherson. And it was just hours after the announced retreat. Putin awarded him the Order of Courage posthumously. So that's my story. And I think I've talked myself right into the end of the hour. Anybody want to make any further comments before we sign off?
No, but this is Carol. Thank you for the references to the other podcasts, because I didn't know about them. So I'm going to listen to them.
Yeah, no, you'll like them. And I always thank Carol for turning us on to Timothy Snyder. He continues to do solid work, and I'll just mention that you can listen to his lectures that he's giving at Yale on the history of Ukraine on YouTube. He's posting them on YouTube. If you want to read more of his essays and podcasts, you can subscribe to his Substack. And I'd say of all the commentators I've heard, I most look forward to his stuff. Yeah.
It would be useful to me if you, in an email, send us a list of the links to the podcasts and
Okay.
YouTube
Okay.
Substack or whatever would be best.
Okay.
So, John, Homer,
John?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay. And remember the raise hand thing. So Homer, go first. I did hear someone else. So stand by. Homer.
okay, we just wanted to know if you said Stomasova has a family, how that baby is. Well, how did that child turn out? The one he was slinging around his head.
At last, the last time I heard, the baby was okay. I don't know. The baby doesn't have a dad, so now he's in bad shape. Bob or Carol.
Yeah.
Carol, I'm sorry. Wait a minute. Carol first, then Bob.
No, my quick one is that you can get Timothy Snyder's class on Apple Podcasts now. So they're easier to find.
Yes. I'm not using Apple Podcasts, but I get a feed by virtue of subscription. I think you subscribe too, don't you, Carol?
Yeah, I do also.
So I'm not sure other people can get it if you don't subscribe, but I might be wrong.
You can get it if you have Apple. Well, I think he also has it on Spotify, but you get them if you check whatever your podcast feed is. You might be able to get not everything he has, but his Yale history class.
Yeah, that's good. But I'll tell you, his essays are great as well. They're really
Essays
good.
are fantastic.
Yeah. I'll tell you something, Carol. I think he is much more entertaining as a lecturer than he is as a writer. It's not that he's a bad writer. It's just that he's such a wonderful lecturer. He's funny. He's spontaneous. He's
very funny.
Yeah.
You know, he has a book out. He almost died of sepsis. Did you know that?
Yeah.
So his book is really powerful.
Yeah, about that whole thing. Yeah. Rudy, you know who knows about this is Brian. He told me all about how sick he was and that he almost died. So, yeah, Bob.
Yeah, you cram a lot in here. I appreciate it. It would be interesting to me to dig deeper into some of those ratings. They seem to be quite different. The Pew and the other one about democracy around the world and those different factors they evaluated. And I guess it just seems like it'd be worth spending some time on that if to figure out if we as a group agree with their rating system and the value of it.
Okay, I will send out the link to V-Dem. My conclusion, just my guess, Bob, to your query is that V-Dem is much better funded. I think Pew was just reporting on other people's less sophisticated work. But on V-Dem, you'll see that they do a lot of statistical support. And you saw they reported their averages in terms of the way we're used to getting medical data, a range of confidence range. So, and you know, they're funded by the World Bank and other international institutions in there. But Bob, they're Swedish. They're socialist. Well, they're not so socialist anymore.
Yeah, well, I'd be interested in looking at that. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. Yes, Aiko.
You said that Russia withdrew east. Is that through Zaporizhia that they left Kherson? Because Zaporizhia, they ran through that pretty fast. They didn't have it before, did they?
No, Zaporizhia is a prize for them because that's part of their land bridge. Their goal is to have a land bridge and not have to rely on the bridge over the actual bridge over the Kerch Strait, the one that got tried to get blown up. So they would very much like a land bridge, and they have to have Zaporizhia, and it was one of the places that had these fake referendums. Yeah. Okay, folks. Hope I'll see you next week, and we'll dive into the history of Crimea. Very interesting. Might be more relevant in the days to come.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thank you,